Hi, I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. The Labor Department has just released its latest report on inflation. The Consumer Price Index rose 8.3% last month. That's higher than expected, but a slight decrease from March. Analysts say it's a sign inflation could finally be peaking. The inflation rate not only affects how much we pay for everyday goods, it can also raise the risk of a recession if it stays high for too long. And now President Biden is calling inflation the #1 problem facing families today and his top domestic priority. Let's bring in ABC News financial contributor Alexis Christoforous along with ABC's Alex Perche in Washington for more on this. Alexis, does this mean the price increases that we've been seeing may finally ease?
I hope so, but I think it's just too early to say whether or not this is a trend. True that consumer prices did fall for the first time in 8 months, but they fell a lot less than expected. This is a very, very modest reprieve, and I think overall this report shows us that high inflation will persist for a longer amount of time and keep the Federal Reserve on that path of aggressive interest rate hikes to combat this high inflation.
And how do they get these numbers? What prices do they focus on?
They look at goods and services that you and I and all of us spend on every day. And in fact, we took a deeper look inside this report just to see what those prices are for all of us. And it's not very pretty. Food prices up 0.9% last month, up nearly 9.5% year over year. Now, gas was actually down more than 6%, but that may prove to be just a temporary reprieve because as we've been talking about, gas prices have since rebounded to a record high. Rent, by the way, makes up a third of that overall consumer price index, up 0.5% for the third straight month. And you know, we're all spending now. We're going out on experiences and traveling. So hotel stays up 1.7%. And look at that. Airfares up 18.6%. Those airlines passing along higher fuel costs to all of us. Also, new cars up 1.1%. That's the highest so far this year. I guess a little bright spot, used car sales were down. Prices were down about 0.4%. But you'd be hard pressed to have a consumer say they felt that.
Yeah, all right. So, Alex, President Biden is trying to defend his administration's actions to fight inflation. He's trying to also place the blame on this pandemic, the war in Ukraine, things that have nothing to do with the White House. But the latest ABC News and Washington Post poll shows 68% of Americans disapprove of his handling of the economy. So how vulnerable are Democrats on this issue with the midterms right around the corner?
Well, Diane, I mean, I think they're very vulnerable, right? And I mean, this is a season where the Democrats were expecting losses, specifically in the House and possibly in the Senate already. And then you have the economy and these new poll numbers. But listen, I mean, the president is saying that it's heartening to see with these latest numbers that the annual inflation has moderated since April. It's not quite as bad as that 4-decade high. But I mean, this is something that's still very much a concern, not just for Americans, but obviously for the administration. I mean, you brought up those stats. Data from earlier this month shows that more than 9 in 10 Americans say they are concerned at minimum about the rate of inflation. And so, yes, I mean, we were talking a lot about abortion in recent weeks, but this issue of the economy is going to continue to be a driver going into these midterms.
And Alexis, it always is when you're talking about politics. People look at, you know, the basics of what's happening in their home first, and this is certainly something that hits home. How does this all factor into what's happening with Americans' paychecks?
It's all about pocketbook economics. I mean, I think President Biden's talking about that all the time. And I think the long and short of it is your paycheck is not going much further, given the numbers today. I mean, we've been seeing wages increase. That's a good thing. But we're in an environment of higher interest rates, high inflation, and those wages are not keeping up with inflation. I think you're going to continue to see businesses, because we're also in the middle of a labor shortage, they're going to have to offer competitive pay. But in order to do that, they're going to raise prices on consumers. It becomes this vicious sort of cycle of growing inflation.
And Alex, the Senate, meanwhile, is set to hold a test vote today on a bill that would protect abortion access nationwide in the event that the Supreme Court does overturn Roe v. Wade. But that vote, I mean, it's all but certain to fail. So why are Democrats moving ahead with this anyway?
Diane, it's symbolic. I mean, that is the point here. They know that they don't have the votes. There are two Republican senators who are actually for abortion rights, Senator Collins and Murkowski. But even they are saying that this bill that's being voted on now is too broad and they won't support it. So it is doomed to fail. But for Democrats, the rationale here is they want a record. And we talked about certainly the economy is going to be something that's talked about going into the midterm election. Well, this now is going to be front and center for a lot of campaigning, especially in some of those swing states, and to have a record of each senator either voting for or against on this particular piece of legislation, I think is going to be a rallying cry, or they assume that it's going to be a rallying cry going into the summer and into the midterm.
And Alexis, one last point on the economy. When you try to factor in everything that's causing this inflation, what is left for either the White House or lawmakers to do to try to fix it?
Very little. I think, some are pushing for a national gas tax holiday. That's one thing that the president can do. We're seeing states sort of take that on themselves. But in terms of bringing down food prices, I mean, what are you going to do? Send out another stimulus check? That was part of the problem with inflation, is that we had pumped so much stimulus, so much government spending into the economy that it caused prices to move up.
All right. Alexis Christoforous, Alex Prochet, thank you both.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And House lawmakers have approved $40 billion in new aid for Ukraine. That's $7 billion more than President Biden requested. Now, this comes after the U.S. intelligence chief warned members of Congress that Vladimir Putin is preparing for a prolonged war and could resort to, quote, more drastic means. ABC News foreign correspondent Tom Soufi-Burridge joins me live now from Kyiv, Ukraine, with more on this. Tom, Ukrainian forces are regaining control in areas Russian troops once occupied. Now the head of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency is also saying Ukraine killed up to 10 Russian generals, and he's warning Putin may turn to a nuclear threat. That's a lot to unpack there. What's the response in Ukraine?
Well, Diane, a really senior Russian politician, the Speaker of the Russian Parliament, has said today in a pro-Kremlin newspaper that the nuclear option shouldn't be taken off the table. But significantly, he was pressed on whether Russia would move first. And he said, no, actually, Russia should only take that option if, in his words, the United States launched a nuclear attack first. So I don't think politicians here in Kyiv are actually focused on that, to be honest. They're focused on the fighting in the Donbass in the east of Ukraine, which is raging right now. Russia claiming it's made significant gains there. The Pentagon saying they're incremental gains. And the Ukrainian president this morning really celebrating the capture by Ukrainian soldiers in the northeast of the country near the second main city, Kharkiv, a significant number of villages.
And President Zelenskyy posted a tweet overnight thanking House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and other House lawmakers for approving a new $40 billion package for Ukraine. If this passes, what would it do for Ukraine right now?
Well, it's a potential game changer, Diane. Think about it. The U.S. has supplied around $13 billion of aid to Ukraine so far. Another 40 on top of that would really have the potential to change the situation on the battlefield. We know from Ukrainian and U.S. officials that the artillery systems supplied by the United States are already being used on the battlefield. All of those types of Western-made weapon systems, like the Javelins against tanks, like the Stinger surface-to-air missiles, to ensure that Russia doesn't have the control of the skies here. That's crucial. It's all making a massive difference. That huge amount of military aid coming in beyond now really could make a vital difference in this next phase of the war.
And some key decision makers in Finland and Sweden are expected to announce their positions on potentially joining NATO. How could that impact the Western pressure on Russia?
Well, look, Vladimir Putin has always tried to avoid this happening, new member states of the NATO alliance. But his invasion of this country, Ukraine, has made it happen effectively, or makes it very likely at this point in time. You know, public opinion in both Sweden and Finland has massively swung since Russia invaded Ukraine in favour of NATO membership. The political dynamic in those two countries in the last 24 hours, we've seen even more rhetoric suggesting the leaders of those two countries are going to apply for NATO membership. And Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, has also said that in the meantime, while they apply for membership, normally that can take a significant amount of time. It might be speeded up. But the UK saying that it would protect Sweden, making an agreement that if Russia tries to destabilise the country in that interim, the UK would act, and you'd assume other partners like the United States would too.
All right, Tom in Kyiv, Ukraine, thank you. Coming up, the concerns of potential summer COVID surge in the U.S. We'll speak with Dr. Alok Patel when we come back. Welcome back. Fears are growing of a summer COVID surge as cases rise nationwide. Omicron subvariants now make up most of the cases in the country. Whit Johnson is outside a hospital in the Bronx with the latest. Whit?
In recent weeks, the numbers have been going in the wrong direction, only adding to concerns about a possible COVID resurgence this summer. New daily COVID cases in the U.S. up 127% in the last month. Hospitalizations also up about 28% during that same time. Those two Omicron subvariants now accounting for the vast majority of all cases in the U.S. And health experts say it's becoming increasingly difficult to track COVID cases because testing in this country has plummeted. More and more Americans are using those at-home testing kits, so the fear is that the true numbers are being underreported. Another way that they're tracking this virus is through wastewater testing, and right now more than 60% of wastewater testing sites across the country are reporting an increase in the presence of COVID.
All right, Whit Johnson, thank you. And as COVID cases rise across the country, Dr. Anthony Fauci is testifying before the House Appropriations Committee. Dr. Fauci just a short time ago told lawmakers the pandemic is a risk to national security.
Whenever you have something that threatens the economy and political stability of nations, it is part of global security. And that's the reason why we take very seriously outbreaks. And as you know, the SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19 is historic, the likes of which we haven't seen in 104 years.
And ABC News medical contributor, Stanford Children's Health physician, Dr. Alok Patel joins me live now for more on this. Dr. Patel, what are you listening for as Dr. Fauci testifies today?
Dan, what I'm listening for is a very clear statement about what situation we're going to be in if we don't get this funding, not only for the next wave, potentially the next pandemic. One thing that's very clear is that there's about $1.5 billion being requested for covering people who are uninsured for treatments, testing, vaccines, all of that. That is not something that we can ignore right now. Not only right now, but moving forward. We have a major problem right now in this country, people who are uninsured or underinsured. It's got to be addressed. I hope Dr. Fauci paints a very clear picture of what kind of trouble we'll be in if it's not.
And there are some new questions now popping up about Paxlovid, the antiviral that's been used to treat COVID as of late. Some people are saying that they're seeing kind of a resurgence in symptoms after they take this. What do we know about that?
Well, we know from the earliest data coming out, that was actually from the trial, that about 1% to 2% of people who took Paxlovid had those rebound symptoms after that 5 days. Now questions are emerging now. If you have rebound symptoms, does that mean you're at greater risk for long COVID? Probably not. Do you need to get retested after that? Should the duration of the time actually be different? But Diane, this also raises the question of when we talk about the new normal and living with things like Paxlovid, Evusheld, these treatment options, do we have all the questions answered? Do we know who needs to be getting them? What else needs to be out there for people to feel safe moving forward, especially those who are most vulnerable?
And we're also, we're getting to a point now where COVID is almost as contagious as measles. That's what you were saying. What does that mean for guidance if you're exposed or if you have it? You know, if it feels like everyone around you, you're exposed all the time, do you quarantine all the time? What's the guidance there?
It is crazy because it does feel like everyone around us now is testing positive and getting symptoms. And I think people need to be prepared for that and be prepared for the fact that if you do something like your own mini version of the White House dinner, that there is going to be some contact and you potentially could get sick. Make sure those rapid tests are around, make sure you're vaccinated, and all those baseline levels of protection are important. And I'm glad you brought up the measles comparison. If we look at Omicron BA1, the basic reproductive number, how many people can be infected from one case, was around 8. BA2 is a little bit more infective than that. They're saying that's about 12. BA2121 is more infective than BA2. Measles, that reproductive number, somewhere between 15 and 20. That means one person can infect 20 others who are not protected.
Okay, that then takes me to the next question, which is we keep hearing we're going from pandemic to endemic. What does that mean? And how does this all factor into that?
You know, I have had so many conversations with my friends who are epidemiologists, public health officials, asking what exactly do you consider to be epidemic? And it seems like the unifying thing that people are looking for is, can we predict outbreaks? Can we predict resurgences? We need to get to a baseline level of infections. That's what it really comes down to. There's a beautiful article, I shouldn't say beautiful, it's a scary article in Nature this year saying that endemic does not mean harmless, and that's important. There are diseases out there such as malaria, which is considered endemic because we know that baseline case number, which still killed 600,000 people in 2020. So endemic does not mean that we're out of the woods and we're not going to see any deaths anymore. It just means that we're going to have a baseline level of infections, but we still have to make sure that treatments, testing, vaccines, all of that is still in the forefront of conversation.
But is there a point where you think we will just treat COVID like a cold, like the flu, like whatnot, where you hear someone has it, but it doesn't create this, ripple effect of things being shut down or having to stay out of work, things like that, where you're out for a day or something like that,
absolutely.
But it's not, it's not as big of a deal.
I think that is part of the conversation that'll happen when it is declared to be endemic. So when we say it's endemic, that means we can predict what it's going to look like in a month, in 2 months, and it's not going to shut down our systems. It's not going to overwhelm our hospitals, but that does not mean that people will not die from it. And again, this ties into what was going to happen with congressional funding as well. Can we actually control our healthcare systems with the new variant, with more cases? All this comes into play when we talk about getting to that endemic level.
And I want to touch on one more thing before I let you go. The CDC issued this new alert on global cases of hepatitis in children. 109 confirmed cases in the U.S. 5 deaths have been reported in the U.S. so far. So what do we know about this right now, and what do parents need to look out for?
We know about it right now is that it is a big mystery, unfortunately, for parents out there. There was that case study out of Alabama showing that the majority of those kids tested positive for respiratory infection, adenovirus. Seems to be a link, but it's not definitive. Well, parents need to know that it's not caused by COVID-19, we don't think, and it's not caused by the vaccine. Those kids were too young or ineligible. But Diane, you and I both have young kids, and it's scary because a lot of these kids were very young. What parents need to be paying attention out there for, and this is going to sound very broad, things like fever, fatigue, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting. You're thinking, my kid does that all the time. I reassure parents and say that we are trained to screen for hepatitis for any of those early symptoms. So when in doubt, chat with the healthcare professional and just ask all those questions.
Okay. Dr. Patel, always great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And ABC News has obtained some new 911 dispatch audio from the final moments of the manhunt for an escaped prisoner and the jail official who helped him escape. Police say corrections officer Vicky White took her own life. Now Casey White is back in custody and talking to police. Alex Perez has the latest.
Casey, did you kill Vicky White?
Escaped prisoner Casey White led in handcuffs into this northern Alabama courthouse, facing additional charges following the end of that dramatic jailbreak and 11-day manhunt that left his accomplice, former corrections officer Vicky White, dead. Inside the courtroom, a stone-faced Casey was surrounded by officers as he was formally charged with escape in the first degree.
Right now, he's on the way to prison. I got every confidence he won't get away again.
Dramatic new police dash camera video capturing the intense moments the fugitive was apprehended Monday in Evansville, Indiana.
I'm looking at it right now. They just got him.
In this newly released 911 call, Vicky is overheard urging White to run.
Get out, run.
With nowhere to hide, officers piling on 6'9" Casey in a white undershirt and dark sunglasses, the 38-year-old finally in handcuffs and back in custody. And these exclusive new images taking us inside that dramatic high-speed chase that led to his arrest and Vicky's final moments. Casey and Vicky here in this Cadillac fleeing a caravan of police vehicles in hot pursuit. The car chase ending in this ditch.
The fugitive task force members actually rammed their vehicle, pushed them into a ditch.
That maneuver, authorities believe, was key. The pair, who investigators say had a romantic relationship for as long as 2 years, was armed with this arsenal of guns, according to the sheriff.
We later found out, had they not done that, the fugitive was going to engage in a shootout with law enforcement.
Crash out, still inside the vehicle. We could hear her on the line saying she had her finger on the trigger. Female is still armed.
As they surrounded the duo, authorities say Vicky shot herself, later dying at the hospital. Discovered in the car, police say wigs Vicky used to disguise herself, camping and survival gear, and $29,000 in cash, believed to be part of the $90,000 Vicky withdrew leading up to the escape. And Diane, this investigation is not over. Authorities say they're still working on building a timeline of what exactly the duo did during the escape and still working to figure out if Casey White could face additional charges. Diane?
All right, Alex Perez, thank you. And despite calls to conserve water amid a worsening drought, California's Water Resources Control Board now says urban water use statewide increased by nearly 19% in March. Meanwhile, the largest reservoir in the country has reached a new historic low, putting states in the West at risk of not just losing water, but the ability to grow food. Kana Whitworth has more.
The water level at Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the country, has dropped to an all-time low. Authorities say each day, the lake that provides irrigation and drinking water to 25 million people continues to decline due to climate change.
There is more and more realization that what we're seeing is unprecedented.
Over the weekend, skeletal remains discovered by paddle boarders.
It was kind of freaky. We had to keep questioning ourselves if this was really real or not.
There's still many secrets that the lake will unveil as the water goes down.
Low water levels also revealing a water intake pipe.
You can see back there in the distance, that is a water intake valve built for nearby Henderson, and you can see it was built for high water.
By summer's end, the Bureau of Reclamation anticipates water levels dropping to a critical point.
We're losing water right now, 1.5 feet a week right now.
California had the driest January, February, and March ever recorded, yet they had the highest March water use since 2015.
Now, authorities assure me there are collective efforts happening right now to conserve water, but we are reaching a critical point, and it is anticipated that by summer's end, American farmers will be looking at facing additional water cuts. And Diane, it's incredibly important to keep in mind that most of the fruits and vegetables and nuts that are grown in this country all rely on that water.
All right, Kana Whitworth, great report. Thank you. Coming up, the end of an era. We are saying goodbye to the iPod when we come back. Welcome back to ABC News Live. Palestinian-American Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was shot and killed today while covering an Israeli raid in the West Bank. Al Jazeera is blaming Israeli forces. The Israeli military chief is now backing away from claims that Palestinians killed her, saying it's now unclear. Celebrity chef Mario Batali has been found not guilty in a sexual assault case. Batali was accused of forcibly kissing and groping a woman at a restaurant in Boston in 2017. The judge in the bench trial acknowledged Batali behaved badly, but questioned the victim's credibility and whether she was financially motivated. And it's the end of an era. Apple has announced it's discontinuing the iPod Touch, the last iPod still made. Will Gantz has more.
21 years ago, Apple got its groove on the go. Introducing the iPod in 2001.
iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket.
The original iPod weighed 6.5 ounces and had a display screen of 2 square inches, costing $400 with a battery life of 10 whole hours. Back then, digitally downloading your favorite music was a novel concept.
A new online music store from Apple Computer called iTunes. It sells single songs for 99 cents each.
And with each new version of the iPod, competitors tried to keep up.
Just yesterday, the Dish Network released its Pocket Dish with a screen up to 7 inches holding 40 hours of video.
But as of this morning, cue up the Don McLean. It's
the day the music died.
The tech company revealing Tuesday that its iPod Touch will only be available while supplies last, effectively ending the iPod line after more than 2 decades in production. Former Apple VP Tony Fadell, credited with inventing the iPod, telling the Wall Street Journal, if we didn't do the iPod, the iPhone wouldn't have come out. It brought Steve Jobs confidence that we could do something outside of the map and that we could actually continue to innovate in new areas. In addition to revolutionizing the music industry, many credit the iPod with introducing them to Apple, and of course, giving us all those funky commercials over the years.
Our thanks to Will Gantz for that. I'm Diane Macedo. Stay with us as ABC News Live continues with news, context, and analysis.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.